I just love this quote, especially in South Africa today, but not just here in South Africa, around the world. Because fundamentally, ownership changes everything. 20 years ago, I was building websites for companies that thought that they would disrupt the world through e-commerce and change their industries. And I came about the industry of stockbroking for the first time, and whilst I'd always wanted to own my own shares, I'd never crossed the divide. And so as I got the opportunity to build technology for an online stockbroker and found that it married my interests and my work, and so it became a passionate endeavor for me. So I jumped ship, stopped selling websites, and decided to see if I could democratize share ownership in South Africa. Fast forward 13 years. I'm sitting on a beach in Mozambique, having somewhat of a midlife crisis, reviewing my career, its success, and its failures. And I'm contemplating what we've achieved as a stockbroking community, what I've achieved in my endeavors and my career. And I'm drawn to this slide, which shows that less people than you would ever imagine really own shares. In South Africa, back in 2000, when I joined the industry, there were less than 0.5% of the country's population owned shares. In 2013, that number was still the same, slightly higher at 0.6%. But the problem, which I thought was a South African one, wasn't just a South African one. It doesn't matter where you look on the slide. The problem persists. Less people own shares than I would like. And so I decided to make it my mission to democratize share ownership everywhere. And the good news about that is that it's a cause that has purpose. Shares are the greatest asset in accumulating wealth. And so they're also the greatest solution to closing the divide between the haves and the have-nots. The problem I had is I'd already spent 13 years trying to solve it and had little success. The industry had spent 2 decades trying to solve the problem with very little success. And so what was I going to do this time around that was different from the last time? And Einstein gave me a hint. We needed to do things differently. We need to abandon the failed strategies, platforms, and projects that had brought us here. And the first rule of what we were going to do was that if it's been done before, don't do it. But that didn't solve the problem as to what we were going to do. And so I needed to find relevance, I needed to find context, I needed to find a purpose or parallels in industries that had disrupted their industries and see if I could make them apply in our industry, in stockbroking. My first and favorite company, and I think lots of CEOs stand on the stage today and want to replicate Amazon, but I remember Amazon personally. I remember the story. I was building a bookstore back in '96, and I remember clearly that Amazon had no differentiator over the incumbent big booksellers, Barnes & Noble. They all had the same books, so they had the same products. The price difference was marginal, and in fact, Amazon was at a disadvantage because it had no distribution. But yet, today, my kids can spell Amazon and not Barnes & Noble. And what did Amazon do that gave relevance to what I was trying to do? And I was encouraged by this. I thought about the process that people buy books. Think about it. You're standing in a social circle and you turn to your friend Steve and you say, Steve, what are you reading? And Steve says, I'm reading Good to Great. And so you ask Steve a couple of questions about Good to Great and you confirm that Good to Great might be a book that's worth reading. And so you leave your social engagement and you enter a bookstore, online or physically, and you start to search for more reasons as to why Good to Great might be for you. Because you haven't really made the decision to buy Good to Great, because you and Steve aren't identical. There are a couple of movies that he referred to that you didn't enjoy. And so what Amazon worked out is if they put more reviews around books so that you could make more connections with that book, you might have a chance of buying it. And guess what? Amazon sells more books than anybody else does today. In addition to that, if Steve enjoyed that book, or if you enjoyed that book, they could sell you more books from people who also enjoyed that book. And so again, Amazon didn't just sell you one book, they sold you multiple books. But what resonated with me is, isn't that exactly how we make our first investment, buy our first share, or invest in our first unit trust? We stand around in social circles, and because I work in financial services, people think I know stuff. about investing. And so they'll ask me, Charles, what's the one share do you think I should own? And my response is swift. It should be the Purple Group. And I tell them stories about how we're trying to democratize share ownership and the culture of the organization and the good work that we're doing. And so that person, let's call her Lindsay, walks away from that engagement, says, the Purple Group sounds like a company that I should buy. And then she phones her stockbroker on Monday, and she phones Brad, and she says to Brad, I'd like to buy Purple Group. Now, Brad's intrigued because Lindsay hasn't phoned before. And so Brad says to her, why would you like to buy Purple Group? And she responds, she says, I was standing around the braai talking to Charles, who works at the Purple Group, and he was telling me good things about it. And so I want to buy Purple Group. And she can start to hear Steve laughing, because that's not how we buy shares. We buy shares based on fundamental analysis, based on PE ratios and dividend yield and earnings per share, stuff that Lindsay doesn't understand. And so she's starting to feel intimidated about the fact that she wants to buy a Purple Group. How stupid of me to think that I could buy a Purple Group. But let's assume that Lindsay is much more resilient than the average Joe, and she gets beyond Steve's discerning attitude. And she says to Steve, it's my money, I'm going to do what I like. And so Steve then asks her the next question. He says, Lindsay, what price would you like to pay for Purple Group? Now Lindsay's feeling really stupid, because I didn't discuss price with Lindsay. We didn't say it was a 60-cent stock. She doesn't know whether it was a 6-cent stock, a 60-cent stock, or a 600 Rand stock. And so now she's feeling even more intimidated, and now she's starting to think she's come to the wrong place. How stupid was she to think that she could come and buy shares? But let's assume again that Lindsay's much more resilient than us, and she marches on. And the final question that comes from Brad is, Brad turns to Lindsay and says, Lindsay, how much would you like to invest in Purple Group? And Lindsay's response is, I was just talking to Charles around the braai. I'd like to invest a couple of 100 Rand. And that's when the phone gets put down, because we don't sell shares to people who want to buy a couple of 100 Rand, because you can't make money and we can't make money either. And so nobody buys shares, because that's the experience of buying shares. That was the experience of buying shares. So the first rule we had to be like Amazon. We had to make you feel smart about the fact that you had found someone who had engaged with you to talk about shares. And we had to surround you with information that gave you the confidence to go on and buy your first share and not intimidate you out. And so we built Amazon into the process. Uber's my favorite company of the current times. And I'm sure that there are hundreds of CEOs who stand up and say they want to Uberize their industry. I think it is now in the English dictionary. But why was it so relevant to me? Why did it resonate to me sitting on that beach in Mozambique in December 2013? I was considering their business model, and it struck me that Uber, for the first time, or the first company ever, that recognized that a customer is more valuable than his custom. Just consider that for a second. You, the individual, is more valuable to Uber than what you spend with them. I don't know how many organizations there are out there that do that, but I know none other than Uber. And the reason why that was so important to Uber is that they didn't have a lot of money to market their business. And so they wanted you, the customer, to be their biggest fan. They wanted you to have an extraordinary service so that when you got out of the van or the car, you raved about Uber. And so Uber doesn't advertise. I've seen one advert in an in-flight magazine, and I guess that made sense. But nowhere else have I ever seen them advertise. And they were so serious about it that they hid the transaction value away from the driver. Think about your journey. The car arrives promptly. The driver opens the door. He's dressed professionally. His car is clean. He offers you some water and a sweet. And the service is extraordinary. And then he finds out how much you're worth, how far you're going. It's too late for him to discriminate against you. He's delivered the service already. And the takeaway point is Uber doesn't discriminate. And as a financial services person, who's somebody who's worked in the industry for 20 years now, that struck a chord. Because in my view, financial services are the biggest discriminator in the world. Let me give you a scenario of prior to launching Easy Equities. Two customers walk through my door. The first one arrives with 100 Rand and the other one arrives with 1,000,000 Rand. The 1,000,000 Rand customer gets surrounded by agents, products and service and whiskey and cigars. He gets to stay as late as he wants, and he gets what he needs. The 100 Rand customer sits in the foyer and works out for himself that there are no products and services for him here, and pays for the parking on the way back. And so our challenge was, we needed to be Uber. We needed to ensure that the 100 Rand customer felt as welcome, had as many products and services as the million Rand customer. And that created an extraordinary challenge to us, but one that we felt we had to overcome if we were going to live by our new rules. Finally, we had to be socially relevant. We had to ensure that investing in shares became something that you were prepared to put on Facebook and Twitter. Why? Because the way I've learned games, and if you're like me, I don't wade through 35 pages of instructions to play Monopoly. I stand behind other players, I watch their moves, and I learned the game, and that's how I've learned all complex games in my life. Chess, drafts, poker, blackjack, you name it. I've stood behind other players. And if we're going to learn this game of investing, then we needed people to allow other people to stand behind them. And social media provided that platform for us. And so those became our 3 rules. But you can't do it alone. And in order to truly democratize share ownership, I needed a team and I needed to empower them to do the things that I do. And so I had to put purpose over profit, because you do not get out of bed to make money for shareholders. You get out of bed to make a difference for people. And so we put purpose over profit. The second thing we needed to do is I needed to create an environment that was brave enough to fail in order to succeed. In my history, 9 times out of 10, the ideas that I come up with are terrible. They're useless. They fail. And sometimes it takes 20 ideas to get the first one that works. If you do not create a culture that embraces that gives a platform for people to fail, you will never succeed. And finally, we had to put culture over strategy. It is so much more important that your staff are happy and rewarded and engaged than what the words that a CEO puts in a business plan. And so those became our rules. What did we do? What did we create? And can I give you a little taste of what we've done? The old world of stockbroking put minimums in front of us. When you add up all of the minimums, what you do is exclude 99% of the population. So what we did is we abandoned minimums, and so anyone can play. Just 65 cents per $100 invested. And we thought what we had created was a shopping market where we were inviting everyone in to come and buy the shares that they love, and we realized very soon that what we were doing was creating this beautiful shopping market with no cover charge, but the rich could shop in aisles 1 to 100, and the poor could shop in aisles 95 to 100. And so we had to address share price affordability. And what we did is fractionalize shares so that everyone could buy the shares that they love, that they want to own. And you can buy 1/10,000th of a share. Your $100 can buy you $1 of 100 companies or $10 of 10 companies. Finally, or not finally, but we had to change the engagement. We had to move away from a world of stock prices and graphs and charts and red and green, because that's not what people understand. But they understand these, brands. And so the engagement point is brands, not share prices. We had to change the methodology from how many shares you would like to buy to how much you want to invest, because that's language that is familiar to you. And we had to take one investment and turn it into an investment habit by ensuring at the purchase point that if you wanted to do it repeatedly, you could, every month, every quarter, every year. We had to ensure that it was transparent and affordable so that you trusted us with your money. And in addition to that, we had to behave like Amazon. And so people who buy Starbucks also buy Apple, American Express, and Netflix. And guess what? You buy one share, you end up buying more shares. And finally, we had to address the biggest problem, because 80% of the world doesn't live in a place where they can have discussions or in social meets about shares. And so we brought asset managers to the platform so that people could buy baskets and bundles of the shares that they bought. But is it working? Just since 2 years, the platform launched 2 years ago, and just since we've launched, we've increased retail participation by 15% in a very short period of time. We've saved South African investors $3.8 million. If you compound that out over 30, 40 years, your investment life, that's the difference between retiring poor and wealthy. But this is the stuff that gets me out of bed and my team out of bed in the morning early. I've got stories of 92-year-old South Africans that felt that they were too stupid and too poor to ever own shares, that are investing through the platform. I've got a 7-year-old daughter who runs around my house filling her Easy Equities money box with everybody's money. And then she pitches up at work and hands it to the brand manager who she trusts and says, please invest it for me. My 18-year-old son, who matriculated today, has saved enough money since the age of 12 that by the age of 21, he will never have to put another cent towards his wealthy retirement, just by swapping iPhones for investments. There is a group of kids who live in Soweto that are 18 years old that are building their wealth fractional share by fractional share every day. They're reading old newspapers and building an investment culture in a place that nobody expected. Our median age is 32. That's 2.5 decades younger than our competitors. And so we're addressing the millennial opportunity. We're getting the youth to invest. And fundamentally, this business is about getting 12-year-olds to invest. Because Warren Buffett said that the greatest investment mistake that he ever made, and he is the man when it comes to investments, was that he didn't start young enough. He was 11. 95% of our customers are first-time investors. So I ask you the question, is it working? We think so. Thank you.